Thank you so much for coming along today to talk about the Western Adelaide region and how climate change might impact it into the future. Today we've got a great session planned for you, and we've got some wonderful speakers to hear from and understand more about how the Western region may be impacted by a changing climate and, importantly, what it might mean for businesses like yours.
So DATWest is the Western Adelaide Climate Change Adaptation Plan. So it operates across the cities of West Torrens, Charles Sturt and Port Adelaide Enfield. We've got people from all over the world who make their home in Western Adelaide.
Coal communities for many reasons are most vulnerable to climate change related disaster events for many reasons in many different levels. First of all, maybe a language barrier or not having access to mainstream emergency alert communication system.
Adapting to climate change will involve all levels of government, business and the community, and we each have our roles to play in that challenge.
Yeah, the size of PepsiCo. We know that we have a large impact with climate change.
Honestly, day-to-day business is tough. Human beings are so used to being resilient and just taking things as they come. I feel like, until some major event happens to prompt us, it's just not given too much thought by, mid to small business.
It can feel like we're completely helpless because we're not big enough to enact what we would deem in our own minds as meaningful change.
Part of adaptation is about the knowledge and awareness, so understanding what that future is going to look like, but also thinking about what are the impacts it's going to have on the things that we value.
What we've really noticed in relation to extreme weather events is two things. Firstly, the storms and the frequency of storms and the damage it does to the beach. The other is power outages. So in peak periods when it's really, really hot and we're at high demand of pulling down power, we over the last sort of 5 years ago had lots and lots of outages.
One thing I found in that last power outage that we had, I was talking to one of my neighbours and she couldn't boil a cup of tea, and all she wanted was a cup of tea. So, I had her come over and just have a cup of tea, and since then we've become good friends actually.
Climate change is a fundamental concern, and sometimes we as individuals and communities can feel helpless. What do I do? What can I do personally in order to change the trajectory of my nation, of the world? But we can as individuals do a lot. What can we then do as a community? What can we do as an economy? What can our business community do?
We're basically saying we're looking for people to change what they do in order to be able to cope better when situations arise like these extreme events.
I've got Amal, who's 15 years old. She migrated to Australia 6 years ago from South Sudan.
So we've got Allegra, she's 23 and she lives at home with no air conditioning. She's unemployed, experiences anxiety and lives alone.
So an extreme heatwave warning has been issued for the Adelaide metropolitan area over the next 3 days.
What do you think's going on for your character right now?
She has a low income, so she might be thinking, could I go somewhere else? But it'd be like, well, can I afford the petrol if I have a car?
It sounds like there's a pretty large extended family living in one house. So yeah, they're going to be cooking in their house.
If I don't have money, how can I adapt to that? How can I put trees or plants in my house? How can I have a new AC, air conditioner? What is the cost to do all these changes? If the people don't know what to do, where to start, who can help them, who can support them, they start to panicking, they start to stress, they start to overwhelm, they are in fear. It's like, what can I do? What can I do? And they don't know what to do.
It's really hard, I guess, to see the impacts of climate change on a day-to-day basis, I guess.
It's so easy, and I fully understand why people like the general public and just the guy on the street looks at the scale of the situation and the ramifications and just gets paralysed by it. But I think as business owners and as entrepreneurs, I think our thing is we get excited by that challenge. We don't get daunted by it.
We were looking at tapping into different media, so radio, perhaps community radio, plays, films, visuals.
Having information in supermarkets and malls, on public transport or the back of taxis, bus stops, on the side of buses, trains. Tapping into the messages that come from our Indigenous community, also really important.
We've really future-proofed our business by reducing our consumption of all of the things that impact climate change.
We are a very energy-hungry business. What we've sort of done to counter that is we've got 290 solar panels on the roof. We're installing a closed-loop cooling system for our stills, so we're reducing water usage that way.
When you choose a new appliance, making sure it's as efficient as possible, you have to consider moving away from gas, electrify as much as you can.
We want impact. So yes, we can tap into their values and push all their buttons, but how do we actually get them to go, oh yes, that's something I should do, to actually then doing it? And I think that it's that bite size, what's accessible. And for the people we've been talking about, we have to be super conscious about all of these barriers that we talked about earlier. So I don't think there's any point saying to somebody who lives in a rental property on very low income or no income, literally, to say you really should install some solar panels and a new battery system because that'll make you more resilient in a power outage. Like, that's not going to wash for them. It is just beyond reality for them. So we need to find what are those impactful things they could literally do in a day-to-day situation while experiencing an extreme event, but also into the future to help them be more resilient.
I think one of the biggest things people can do to prepare for climate change is make a plan for different scenarios.
Being aware of, whatever kind of disaster or whatever kind of weather event is coming up, thinking about it before it gets to you.
When I hear on the news that a heatwave's forecast, I think about my kids, my little kids, but I also think about my grandpa. So he's 94 now and he lives by himself still. So I ring him up and I say, right, you're coming over to our house for a few days and we'll look after you.
The best advice we can possibly give anyone who has a chronic health condition is actually to be prepared and to expect the unexpected. So maybe at least every 6 months, book in and see your GP and maybe even write down a bit of a plan. What are you going to do in the event of extreme weather event? Like, what if you are stuck in your home for 3, 4, 5 days with smoke? What are you going to actually do if you can't leave home? Are you prepared to manage that?
Sort of think about the food you might need for the next few days, making sure there's ice in the freezer.
I think any businesses need to be prepared for emergencies because they are occurring, unfortunately, more and more often. So I think being prepared, having a plan in place and testing it every 6 months or so to make sure you're familiar with it. Don't just do it and put it in a drawer and forget about it. You need to really keep refreshing it and keep your team refreshed on it.
Once an emergency hits, you can't control what your mind's doing and you can go into panic, and if you haven't got all of that stuff written down and accessible, it's very difficult to actually respond in a way that's going to be able to help you cope with that and then recover after.
Know about what services and reliefs are put in place around you, around your family.
Our staff work outside and the business doesn't stop because it's 40 degrees. We've got now gators, which is what the guys drive around in, and they've got canopies over the top, so they're protected from the direct sunlight.
We also try to limit our landfill. We do that by sending our green waste through to Jeffreys and our spent grain in particular through to a local dairy farmer who picks it up. And we capture the rainwater we can and we use that for wash down and hose down water.
We have a huge impact on climate change. Our business definitely reduces the waste going into landfill, but more importantly, it reduces the amount of new trees required to produce the pallets each year. And so we're probably saving somewhere between 20 and 30,000 trees from felling yearly currently. We just can't continue to waste.
Interestingly, a lot of the research about adaptation and building resilience talks a lot about communities and how connected they are, and the real importance of people knowing each other, having someone to call on when something does happen.
It's better to have a good neighbour than a far friend. So the idea being that if you can call on the person next door or over the street, that's much more useful than your best friend who lives, 200 miles away or even 10 miles away.
Seeing what resources that you can share within your neighbourhood. For example, if someone's got a generator and can keep your medications cool if the power goes out, that's a really important one for a lot of people. But also just knowing that your neighbours are there for you and that you can provide support for them too is really comforting.
Do you have one other person you can rely on in your life? Like some people are living in quite challenging circumstances, and then they don't necessarily have someone around them that they can call on to help. It makes, life can get pretty tough.
And you know that it's good to have connection, but I think it's just reminded me how essential it is for older people or people who are unwell to have connections to other people. If they don't have children or their children are far away, then they need connections that are close by that can help them.
If you don't have the resources to implement the message, then it doesn't matter what the message is. On their own, they're not going to be able to do it. And so that's why that message of neighbourliness is so important.
What I would say to the small business out there is that let's not focus on what we can't do. Let's instead focus on what we can do. And if that is, a 1% difference, a 0.5% difference, do that. Because if we all do it, we're always going to be in a better place.
Get educated, you need to actually understand. So reading, watching videos, YouTube, etc. is what we did.
I think every little step that you make, like if it's just changing, sort of throwing something into a recycling bin rather than just into the bin, or actually taking your glass to a recycling depot and that sort of thing, it's just very small steps. And the more small steps make up the bigger journey. It's that simple.
Sometimes I think of it being the elephant in the room. It's the thing that we don't necessarily want to confront, and it's lurking there all the time over our shoulder.
Do something, but above all, get started.
There's so many different things that we can all do to better prepare for the impacts of extreme events as a result of climate change.
I would be more encouraged if we saw our government making changes, because this is asking us to adapt, but they don't seem to be adapting. If you want to make sure people pick up things and feel hopeful, then you've got to be seeing it on the governmental level as well.
I think politicians should do these role plays.
I like it.